Hello, and welcome to Karen's Library.
This boiling the frog parable, it's an old parable, and the first video I'll show you will explain to you what it is, was an article written by one of the Cradle's writers, and it was actually called How Iranians Boil a Frog. But the reel we made on our podcast about this story went viral. And I guess it's the purpose of parables, to explain complex situations much more easily. And I think everybody understood that in the circumstance Israel finds itself in today, it is slowly and incrementally losing its institutions, losing its narratives in all areas. So it was something that went viral because it made sense and people could suddenly understand from an article called How Iranians Boil a Frog why the strategy of slow incremental hits at Israel over an extended, protracted period of time could be more successful than a short, hard war, which is kind of how the Israeli-Arab wars of the past have been fought, with no significant gains for the Arab side. So when you have a country like Israel, which is a colonial project supported by the unipolar world, how can you possibly fight it? You know, the most advanced army in the region, in West Asia. Please, I urge all of you, regardless of what AUB policy is, to start using the term West Asia instead of the Middle East. Middle East is a colonial narrative. West Asia is where we are geographically, and I will be using it a lot in this talk, yeah. So although the article was about Iranians boiling a frog, you will see how this plays across all parts of the resistance axis, from Lebanon to Iran to the Palestinian resistance to the Iraqi resistance factions to Yemen's Ansarullah, etc. Let's jump forward. I will just very calculating its response, and I want to just about an article that we will publish this week, and the article is called How Do Iranians Boil a Frog? Quote, legend has it that a frog placed in a shallow pot of water heating on a stove will remain happily in the pot of water as the temperature continues to climb, and will not jump out even as the water slowly reaches boiling point and kills the frog. The change of 1 degree of temperature at a time is so gradual that the frog doesn't realize he's being boiled until it's too late. Now, this has been Iran's asymmetrical strategy towards Israel. Don't engage directly in the war to make Iran a clear target for Israel, but have its allies engage. And they are doing it of their own volition, and their allies are not state actors, right? So it's like a swarm from here, from there, from Yemen, from Iraq, from Lebanon, from Gaza, from the West Bank. Israel gets truly swarmed. Look at Israel's condition today. Its economy is in shambles. Hundreds of thousands of Israelis in the north and the south have been displaced. No homes, no jobs. The blockade of its vital shipping waterways, the Eilat port, is disabled, and it knows that its Mediterranean ports, Ashdod and Haifa, can be disabled too. 80% of Israelis outside say they will not return. And you're going to see with the new conscription laws that you're going to have a huge exodus of ultra-Orthodox Jews, hundreds of not thousands of Israeli soldiers dead, and international pariah status. This is how Iran is boiling the frog. Okay, so one of the things I've always argued is to, is in this global narratives game. Oops, sorry. How do you go to the next one? Okay. In the global narratives game, what we tend to do in this region is, I always say the West dominates the narratives, but now we in the East control the outcomes on the ground. Do not forget this. After a decade or more of the Syrian war, they were not able to win. After Lebanese civil war, after the invasion of Lebanon, they were not able to win. They can deplete, but they can't win. We now control the ground. But we still fall into their narrative traps. Come on in. We still fall into their narrative traps. And what is the narrative trap? It's when they say something and it's so absurd Like, for instance, the Telegraph article that came out a few weeks ago or a month ago saying that Hezbollah was hiding shipments of missiles at Rafi Hariri airport in Beirut. And of course, the government went over with ambassadors and reporters to show the hangars and that this was not the case. But we keep reacting to their narratives. By reacting to their narratives, we become rejections in their narrative game, or rejectionists, and we give oxygen to their narratives. One way to change this is for us to craft our own narratives. And I promise you, within no time, they will start to become rejectionists in our narrative and give it oxygen. So this is something very subtle, but they understand it very well, and we don't. We react, okay? We need to form these narratives now and stick by them. You know, we're not just making up stuff like they do. We're actually talking about real things that are happening in the region. You don't budge from them, they become the rejectionists. So one of the things this Boiling the Frog video did was, it went viral, but an Israeli official became a rejectionist of our narrative. And that happened within a week or two. It was fantastic. At the cradle, we were bubbling with joy. And this was the Israeli ambassador to the UN, Gilad Erdan. And he did this speech at the UN Security Council, and we couldn't believe the words that came out of his mouth.
Every red line, and Israel reserves the legal right to retaliate. We are not a frog in oily water. We are a nation of liars.
The frog parable is very, very old. We couldn't
came up with that this on this.
So we had a writer, Shivan Majehan. Hold on, I don't want to get it wrong. It's still a long name. Marajendra, I think, who wrote this article, and I loved it. And I actually spoke about it on our podcast. The people who make the reels for our podcast loved that story. They made a reel out of it. That went viral, and then all of a sudden we hear this, the UN Security Council. So we just, we have a thing at the cradle where we'd like to start forming the narratives and having them reject ours. And this was such a beautiful one, because people saw it and people responded to it very positively. And I think the parable helped a lot of people understand, this question when after Gaza started, why aren't the Arab states doing anything about this? And then it was like, why isn't Hezbollah acting? What is this rubbish? These little silly clashes across the border. Why aren't they doing more? So the parable of the boiling frog made a lot of people understand that this is how you get your enemy. You boil it incrementally. Hopefully it doesn't notice for some time until it's past a tipping point. So here's what I'm going to do. So Israel is heading towards a breakdown of the state. This is across all sectors: political, military, economic, and societal. We started seeing signs of this before October 7th, with the big judicial reform protests. Many Israeli Jews talking about leaving the country, that this was now in a liberal state with the most extremist coalition government in the history of the state. But October 7th events exacerbated it and accelerated it. Furthermore, this breakdown is, here's the thing. So these fragmentations are happening across these sectors, but also institutionally and foundationally. But important is that during these disruptions of the state and its governing bodies are unable to form and create urgently needed corrections, There's no Band-Aid solutions for these. These are foundational changes that need to be made. The breakdown is also happening during a time of war on 5 different fronts. It's very hard to govern during war in general, but not when you're engaged on every one of your borders. And importantly, it's happening during a time of international political disorder globally, And that's happening because we're moving from a unipolar world to, I want to say, a bipolar world, in the sense that since the Cold War, we haven't had 2 poles. And now we have a second pole emerging to challenge the unipolar. world. And then beyond that, a multipolar order. So I hope everybody understands that part, because Israel is not just waging a war, it is fundamentally also affected by the geopolitics, not just in the region, but globally. The comfort it had before during a unipolar world no longer exists. And I will show you why. So the lecture is going to break down the elements contributing to Israel's collapse, okay, military, societal, economic, and political. And then the second, much shorter part will be the global conditions that may accelerate this. At its core, Israel is a colonial project, okay? It's an artificial project. These are imported populations, imported ideas, imported systems of governance to West Asia. It has used the most questionable sliver of legitimacy, God is a real estate agent, to normalize its existence. But it also is the most advanced conventional military force with qualitative weapons in the region. Okay, so now boiling a frog undetected is a process. It takes time. It's also a full spectrum war. So information, narratives, psychological, military, economic, societal, cyber. But you first have to understand the enemy, which is, I think, something that the resistance axis really has done very well, because the resistance axis is very strategic thinker. I would say this is something that is permeated to most of its parts. In order to understand the enemy, you have to know what its foundational vulnerabilities are and its foundational strengths. I posit that Israel, or the frog in this case, stands only on two legs, okay? There's only two things holding Israel up. One is its myths and its fairy tales. Everything from, perpetual victimhood, right? The Holocaust, therefore we were entitled to something, to this was a swamp and we made it a garden. To we are the only democracy in West Asia. We are the only country in West Asia that shares values with the unipolar world. The myths and the fairy tales are just astounding. They absolutely shape not just the narrative what Israel is, but what its enemies are. They're savages. They're brutal. They're violent. They surround us. They just want to kill Jews, and on and on and on. But and this is what's helped people excuse Israel all along. You cannot touch the Holocaust industry. You cannot make a dent in it. The second leg that this frog stands on is Jews moving to Israel. Without Jews moving to Israel, there is no Jewish state. There is no political Zionism, period. Both of Israel's legs have been fractured badly since October 7th. Jews are leaving the state in greater numbers than before. Israel is considered a pariah state by many, and getting there. We have had ICJ and ICC rulings, on Israel since October 7th. This is kind of astounding. The ICC or ICJ is reserved for African leaders and Vladimir Putin, not for Israel, So why would Israel's enemies take on a state with a full-on military reprisal? Is this a possibility? Okay, because I'm positing that boiling the frog is the only possibility, and it will necessarily end the state. Okay, there's no in between, unless the war was stopped in the first month of Gaza. They could have done that. They didn't. Now it is an existential war for Israel. Why did the resistance axis not attack Israel full on with all its new missiles and secret tactics and stuff that have been developed since 2006 and whatnot? The reason is because any war against Israel from multiple fronts at the same time would have absolutely galvanized Israel's Western allies, with their infinite military arsenals. They would have come full on and participated in the war to ensure Israel wins.
And you can find the rest of it there. And that's all. See you later. Bye.